Thanks, everybody. Please do take a seat. Great to see you all here. Thank you for being here in this room. Welcome, and welcome to everybody on Zoom. We're so glad you're joining us this morning. It's great to all be together. My name's Matthew. I'm the lead pastor here at Cedar Ridge. I've actually been away for the last couple of weeks, as some of you may know. Unexpectedly, I got called back to England somewhat urgently because my father's been in really bad health. He has progressing Parkinson's disease, also had a stroke, was in hospital, ended up coming home, and my mum just really couldn't cope looking after him. He's in pretty bad shape. So went back, and so I've been providing 24-hour care for him, which has been interesting, somewhat stressful, but also very beautiful in a unique kind of way. We've just had some very precious, intimate moments, so I feel very privileged to have been able to do that. I was hoping, and my whole family was hoping, that I might be able to bring him back to live with us so we could take care of him, but he's just not in that kind of a physical state. That's just not possible. He really needs 24-hour care and more care than we could provide for him. So I managed to arrange for him to go into a home temporarily, a sort of urgent respite measure, and I'm going to be returning tomorrow to England to work out long-term care for him. So just wanted to say thank you to everybody for praying for me and for my family. Wanted to especially say thank you to Ruth for being so supportive and keeping things moving forward here, and to Brian as well. I'll keep you posted, but just want to say thank you for your patience and thank you for your prayers. I'm a little sleep deprived, so this morning might be interesting. Or on the other hand, you might not notice any difference to my usual garbled self, right? So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. I think, as Jen mentioned, it's the 5th Sunday of Lent today, and we're going to be looking. We've got this theme going through Lent of stones and rocks, this story in stones that we've been tracking with. And today we're going to look at the passage where Jesus calls Peter a stone or a rock, and the name Peter is of course a name given to Simon by Jesus because it's a play on the word for rock in Greek. The word for rock in Greek is Petra, and Jesus calls Simon Petros. Of course, Jesus spoke Aramaic, so he actually uses the term rock in Aramaic, which is Kephas. And so sometimes when you read the Christian scriptures, Peter is referred to as Kephas. That's just his Aramaic name. So let's jump into it. We're going to look at a story in Matthew 16. We're going to break it up into 3 sections. I think probably for many of us, it might be a very familiar story. So we're just going to read it in those 3 sections and then reflect on some of the content, particularly as we think about our Lent themes and how these things apply to us, how we might be challenged to change and be transformed, how perhaps we might also be rock. Today's title is called Foundational Stones. I mean, how can we be a foundational stone, not just for ourselves, but for other people in our lives, a foundational stone for the world, perhaps. So let's just look at the first part of this. Here's what it says in Matthew 16. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still Jeremiah or one of the prophets." In other words, they think Jesus is somebody come back from the dead or a reincarnation of sorts. What about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." So, a few comments about this section. First of all, it's very pointed out very clearly at the beginning of the passage that they're in Caesarea Philippi. And that's a significant location. It's called Caesarea Philippi because there was a huge temple dedicated to Augustus Caesar in that location. I think we have a little map, actually. Oh, I didn't finish off the passage there. First mistake. I think we've got a little map here. You can see it up there, and so just a little northeast of the Sea of Galilee. It's in an area ruled by Philip the Tetrarch, Philip II, who was one of the Herods, That's where the Philip part of Caesarea Philippi comes from. And then it was named after Caesar Augustus. A big temple, as I say, was built there to honor Caesar. That sort of, the Caesars kind of bridged the political and religious power divide in that the Caesars were deified and worshipped as gods, and also honored as political rulers. And it was also a center of not just political power in terms of Herod and Caesar, but also religious power from the Greek mythology. So we have, it's near Mount Hermon, which was believed to be in that day the birthplace of the god Pan. In fact, there's a cave there called the Cave of Pan. I think we have some pictures of these, I think, to go up, where the River Jordan flows out. So it's the source of the River Jordan and was believed to be also the entrance to the underworld, Hades. So when Jesus references there the gates of Hades, the gates to the underworld, he's referencing something that was right there in the location that he's having this conversation with his disciples. So this is a location of power, political power, religious power, historical power. And it's in this context that Jesus asks the question, who do you say that I am? Or who do people say that I am? Who do you think I am? He goes on then to say. And it's in this context that Simon says, you're the Christ, or you're the Messiah, the anointed one, as we've just been singing. You're the promised one who's going to usher in this new world order, this kingdom of God, this new way of life. And we have lots of heaven to earth kind of language. Jesus is saying, heaven is coming, if you like, that there's no separation now between heaven and earth. The kingdom of heaven is God's will being done on earth. And there's this new way, this beautiful new way, which is in contrast to the gates of Hades, the underworld, the realm of the dead, the realm of decay and destruction. Rather, this is about a way of bringing life and goodness and health and hope and vitality. And not only that we're invited into that, because Jesus says to Peter, I'm going to build on you. You're the foundation on which I'm going to build. And you will have the keys to the kingdom. You're going to participate in bringing this kingdom in. And I think by extension, Jesus is saying that to more than just Peter individually. Perhaps Peter is somewhat symbolic of that. Now, we obviously have a tradition of seeing Peter, in some parts of the church, seeing Peter as the first pope, and Jesus is being very specific. That would be the interpretation here, that Jesus is being very specific about Peter as being that leader, that foundational stone. I wonder, though, whether Peter is symbolic, as I say, of followers in general, and perhaps the foundation is more the revelation that Peter has, which is, you are the Messiah. In other words, the church is the people following Jesus as the Messiah, people who recognize Jesus as the one who's bringing this new way. Now, that's all really wonderful, right? The story starts off full of hope, full of anticipation. It's hugely affirming of Peter. But this story is full of irony. It's full of little twists and tensions and ironic details. And perhaps the first one of those is that Peter, really, Simon, as his original name is anything but a rock, right? If we read through the Gospels up to this point in Matthew, perhaps we haven't seen too much of Peter's foibles, but certainly as we read on, we realize that Peter is not a particularly stable person, not particularly steady, not necessarily somebody you would want to build your future movement on. I can almost imagine, and we don't get any detail of this, but the disciples were always arguing about who's the greatest. We have many accounts of that. I can imagine when Jesus says to Peter, "You're the rock, and I'm going to found my church on you," that the others would have been like, "What, Peter? They know what he's like." We don't get any notion of that, but that's reading in a little bit, but you can almost imagine. There's an irony here that Peter really is not all that stable. So what do we make of this? Well, I think there's several ways we can explain that. Firstly, Jesus believes in Peter in perhaps a way that we don't tend to believe in ourselves, or we don't believe in one another. That Jesus sees something in Peter despite his weaknesses, despite his instability. Jesus sees through that to see who he could be, and has this very accepting, positive approach to Peter, and that's a really beautiful thing. I think it's interesting actually when we had to switch the order around of these stories during this series because of me being away. But this message was going to follow the message about Jesus being a foundation stone, or the cornerstone, if you can remember back that far. Ironically, Jesus was the cornerstone that was rejected. Here's Peter, the foundational stone that is overwhelmingly accepted by Jesus. So there's huge acceptance here in Jesus's statement. I think also probably, we tend to think of Jesus as deliberately going out and choosing weak people to be his followers and to be his leaders. And that may well have been the case. But Jesus invited lots of people to follow him. And not everybody did. And it seemed like most of the strong people chose not to follow him. So Jesus kind of ends up with whoever will follow him. And it's like Jesus is, it's not, I don't mean Jesus was scraping the bottom of the barrel or anything like that. What I mean is that Jesus is saying, I'm going to work with whoever I have. There's a sort of pragmatism perhaps to Jesus here. We tend to blame our resources, right? Or we look at our resources and think, oh, it's not enough. You rarely hear Jesus talk about anything not being enough. Whether it's 5 loaves and 2 fish, that'll do. I'll feed all these people. Whether it's followers who may not be totally up to speed, up to crack, Jesus is saying, no, I'm going to build my church on you. There's this sense of acceptance that Jesus has that has such hope and possibility woven into it, which is, I think, often in contrast, certainly to the way I look at life. It's very easy to see the negative, very easy to see what we don't have rather than what we do have. I think there's another way of interpreting this too, why Jesus is saying this to Peter. And it's perhaps related to this issue of weakness, related to this issue of lack of power and strength. And remember, this is a story about power in many senses, because it's set in this power base of Caesarea Philippi. And that is that, as we're going to see in a moment, Jesus knows that this kingdom of God, this movement he's leading, this messianic movement he's leading, is not like any other movement. It's not like the way of the world. It's not like anything we've encountered before. It's counterintuitive. It's upside down. And strong people are going to find it hard to transition. Confident, self-confident, people who believe in themselves, perhaps people who are used to being believed in, will be too quick probably to hold on to what they've up till now found to be a successful way of living, or a successful way of influencing other people and bringing about change. And it's going to take people who perhaps haven't experienced that success to the same degree, who might be more likely to let go of some of the old ways and might be more adaptable to some of these trans-rational, totally new ideas that Jesus is introducing and leading people into. And we get that, I think. We get that issue in the next part of the passage. That seems to be where Jesus is going here, because let's take a look at the next section. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the 3rd day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. So this is a bit of whiplash here, right? So here's Jesus previously saying, you're the rock on which I'm going to build this church. And here he is saying, get behind me, Satan. And it's a kind of a different name, right? A different label he's giving Peter here. In fact, he says, you're a stumbling block. In other words, you're blocking, you're a rock, but you're blocking the way forward here. Interesting, the language here, actually, because if you remember week 1, when Ruth was introducing the series, she was talking about the temptations of Jesus, and Jesus uses the language, get away from me, Satan. It's exactly the same language here as get behind me, Satan, except with the insertion of one extra word, which is opiso, which has the connotation of behind. And you wonder whether Jesus is actually in the wilderness. Jesus is he's not really on his mission yet. He's not really going anywhere yet. And he's being tempted, and it's just like, get away from me, Satan. Whereas now Jesus has a mission, the kingdom of God, this messianic movement. And he's seeing Peter's resistance to it as a blockage. And he's saying, get behind me. Nothing is going to stop me from moving forward in the way that he's describing here, which is not the way you would imagine. Here's Jesus in a location that's all about power and authority and influence. And he's saying the way of my kingdom is not going to be out-Romaning the Romans. It's not going to be out-violencing the violent ones. It's not going to be repeating this cycle of violence and aggression and power and control that this part of the world has been under. If you think of it's under Roman rule now. Previously, it was under Hellenistic rule with Alexander the Great. He took over from the Persians, who took over from the Neo-Babylonians, who took over from the Assyrians, going back centuries and centuries and centuries, cycles of violence, of power and control that have got absolutely nowhere. Jesus is saying, actually, that's not the way I've come to bring. I've come to bring a totally different way. That's about love. It's about forgiving your enemies, loving your enemies. It's about choosing the pathway of peace and non-violence. It's about turning the other cheek. It's about saying, okay, I'm not going to treat you how you deserve to be treated. I'm going to treat you how I would want to be treated myself. And it's turning everything upside down and saying, I'm going for the jugular, if you like, when it comes to the human condition. And we're going to turn it upside down and have a revolution that is a different kind of revolution. And it's based on love, and it requires absolute sacrifice to the point where Jesus seems to know that he's going to die. And he's not going to resort to violence to protect himself. He's not going to give up on his way in the face of opposition and hardship to still maintain control and still maintain power. This is a revolutionary approach that Jesus is taking. And Peter doesn't get it. Peter doesn't seem to understand it. Hence, get behind me, Satan. Now, I think in all of this, there's still, it's pretty radical, right? It's pretty radical. And it's almost like Jesus is now dismissing Peter. Peter is, I think, perhaps stood up and said, okay, I'm the rock now. So this isn't going to happen to you, Jesus. Peter's mindset is still on what Jesus described as earthly things or the way of the world rather than heavenly things or the way of Jesus and this kingdom of heaven coming to earth. Peter's still caught up with the old ways. But Jesus, as we're going to see in a moment, I think still has great hope for Peter. He's not by saying, get behind me, Satan, or saying, Peter, you just don't get it. He's not saying, you're no longer the rock then, Peter, you just failed your first test. Rather, I think Jesus, as we were saying earlier, is recognizing in Peter somebody who has the potential to change. Right now, he's in the way, but that's not always going to be the case. And in this next section, I think we get this played out for us. Then Jesus said to his disciples, so he's talking to them collectively, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. So Jesus here is saying, I think it's possible to learn, to embody, to inhabit this new way, this way that I'm talking about. And the pathway there is discipleship or self-denial. And I think we talk a lot about self-denial during Lent, don't we? It's a season of self-denial in many respects. And I think, when we talk about self-denial, it can almost have a connotation of self-hatred or self-loathing. It's like, we're so awful, we need to, beat ourselves up, and it can be very self-deprecating. But think of it like this. We all have tendencies, right? We all have momentum in a certain direction. So our lives have momentum. Some of those things are really good, positive. We've got good habits, positive habits, healthy ways of thinking, being, and doing. But we also have some negative momentum, right? We have just a train of thought, a way of behaving, a way of living that is often not healthy, sometimes even destructive. And unless we are intentional about addressing those issues and doing something about it, and engaging in transformation and engaging in practices that help us be transformed, then we're just going to carry on going on in the same direction. And I think what here Jesus is saying to his disciples is, look, my way is not an easy way. It's not necessarily the most obvious way. In fact, it perhaps feels counterintuitive, unobvious. It's crazy even. Like, why would you turn the other cheek? Why would you not seek power for good? Like, we'd only use it for good. We'd only use it to help people and to, but we know that it never works out that way, right? So Jesus is saying, look, this difficult way of mine, it is doable, and the way to it, the way into it, is self-denial. It's dealing with our own issues. It's dealing with our own lives. It's dealing with that momentum that takes us away from that way, so that we can align with the way. And this is incredibly hopeful, I think, because in the case of Peter, it's saying it's possible for you to change, Peter. You don't get it right now, but over time, and I think we see this played out in Peter's story, as he follows Jesus, he begins to get it. He begins to understand it. He begins to embody it and live it out. And that's I think an incredibly hopeful thing for us. So there's the way of Jesus is the way of self-denial. It's a way of addressing our own issues. And I think that's a fitting thing for us to reflect on, as I said, during the season of Lent. But Jesus goes on to say, take up your cross. Okay, you can't follow me unless you're prepared to take up your cross and come after me. And let's remember again here that when we hear that word cross, we have so many, I think, positive connotations with the cross, right? We have a cross here, right? Crosses are emblematic in culture in general, and from a Christian point of view, if you think about it in the history of the church, we've got a theology about the cross, which is, different traditions have different theologies, but it's positive. We see the cross as a positive thing, as a healing thing. But the listeners at that time, Jesus hasn't been crucified yet. The listeners at the time would only have the current connotation of what the cross was about. And the cross was a method of execution that the Romans used. And they only used it on certain people. It was used for slaves and rebels, foreign rebels. You could not be crucified as a Roman citizen unless you committed high treason. So really we hear what Jesus is saying. And the imagery, I think, is of bearing your cross, taking up the cross, is the patibulum, the crossbeam of the cross, which before crucifixions, what we're led to understand is that very often the condemned person would carry that beam across their back up to the place of crucifixion. And so there was a visual image. Many of these people, especially in a power center like Cedar of Philippi, many people would have seen people, criminals or condemned people, walking through the streets to their execution. And Jesus is saying, you need to carry that patibulum, you need to carry that cross. In other words, he's calling us to rebel against Rome, but perhaps Rome is symbolic of the way of the world. Jesus is saying, this self-denial I'm talking about is about rebelling against the way of power, the way of violence, the way of self-centeredness, the way of the world, and choose this other way that I'm bringing in, which is difficult and hard, but ultimately life-giving. And he's calling us to lose our lives, to let go of the fear that holds us back, to let go of the fear that prevents us from really embracing the way of Jesus for all that it stands, both at a personal level, at a societal level, at a national level. To embrace that fully, we have to let go of our lives. We have to, that's this tension, that's this irony, that's this paradox that Jesus concludes this section with. If you love your life, if you hold on to it, and your number one goal is self-preservation, self-protection, you'll lose it. There's nothing there. There's nothing of eternal value there. But if you let go, if you follow this way of love, there's ultimate fulfillment, ultimate health, ultimate reconciliation, and a redeemed, reconciled future for humanity. And he's beckoning us into that way. I think as we reflect on all of this, we can take great hope in this story. It's It's a difficult story. It's an awkward story. It starts off great with Peter, Jesus saying, Peter, you're the rock. It kind of gets a little tense when he's saying to Peter, get behind me, Satan. And it ends with this incredible challenge to take up our cross. But that's the challenge I think we revisit every Lenten season, right? We come back to this place of saying, how can we be transformed? How can we be the people that Jesus believes we can be? How can we be the people that can actually be a rock, truly be a rock, not just for ourselves, but for other people, where we are creating safety, we are creating stability, and we're creating home, if you like, for people to find refuge. So I want to wrap things up here with just 4 applications, if you like, or 4 challenges. I'm calling them foundation stones, sort of stones we can perhaps insert into our lives to strengthen them. First one is this: believe in ourselves, because Jesus does. I think self-belief, I mean, that can sound sort of arrogant, and obviously, there's the whole sort of self-affirmation movement is pretty big these days. But I think we all doubt ourselves, right? The more I talk to people, the more I find that most people are like me, in lacking confidence, lacking self-belief, struggling with fear, struggling with anxiety, worrying that we're not good enough, worrying that we don't have enough, worrying that in any given situation, we might get found out, right? But Jesus is looking at Peter saying, you're the rock. He's looking at somebody who's really anything but a rock and saying, you're a rock. And he's not being overly optimistic, because in the next part, he's saying, get behind me, Satan, right? So he gets Peter, but he's saying, you're enough, Peter. You're enough. You have enough. I believe in you. And maybe we can go forward in life with a similar sense of Jesus believes in us. When we think about all the challenges that we face as humankind, let alone the challenges we're going to face when we go back to work tomorrow morning, or go home to our families this afternoon, all the very personal challenges we have, can we believe in ourselves that we have what it takes, that we can be a rock, we can be a source of safety and stability in all those situations, that we can be part of this messianic movement that brings hope and reconciliation and healing. Secondly, let go of our lives. So I think we talk about this quite a lot here at Cedar, is that following Jesus, discipleship, is at the transition point, or the cusp of acceptance and intentionality, right? So we're not going to change or be good for anything unless we realize that we're completely loved, completely accepted. That's the first point here. But then change is only really going to happen if we lean into the change, if we make effort, if we are intentional about it. And I think that's what Jesus is saying in this passage. Peter, you're the rock. You are totally accepted and enough. But you also need a change. Take up your cross, deny yourself. And so letting go of our lives is our intentionality. It's like saying in any one of those given situations that we've just been thinking about, or perhaps going around in our minds right now, where we don't feel adequate enough, or where perhaps we feel afraid, of where we're not believing in ourselves. As we begin to believe in ourselves, we can let go of the need to defend ourselves, to protect ourselves. In any given crisis, we can become less centered on, how am I going to get through this? How do I not get damaged? How do I not get hurt? And more able to say, actually, I'm not going to worry too much about my life. I'm just going to be this positive presence, this positive force. How's that person doing? How can I help in this situation to bring about some security, some safety for that other person? Maybe even somebody who's annoying us or irritating us, or who might be the source of our lack of confidence, right? This letting go of our lives is easy when everything's going right. Or, choosing the way of love is easy when everybody's behaving lovingly. Choosing that way when people are opposing us or are against us or seem to be undermining us, intentionally or not, that's way harder. That's where it comes to letting go, just letting go of that fear, letting go of the need to be in control, the need to dominate any given situation because we're afraid. So letting go of our fear, I think, is something that Jesus is talking about in this story. Thirdly, choose love over everything else. If we think about whatever situation we're in, what is the loving option? And that doesn't mean being a pushover. It doesn't mean necessarily taking the easy option. It might mean the most loving thing might be speaking out about something where you know it's going to create tension, or saying no to somebody where you know it's going to create tension. But it might also be choosing to forgive somebody, choosing to overlook somebody's faults, choosing to treat somebody the way you would want to be treated rather than the way they obviously deserve being treated. It's making those decisions for love in every one of those circumstances. That's where all this plays out. That's where the rubber hits the road, if you like, in this messianic way of Jesus. And then fourthly, never underestimate the power of sacrifice. Jesus is calling us to sacrifice. Jesus himself paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I think sacrifice is something we're familiar with to advance certain things, right? We make certain sacrifices in order to advance our career. We make certain sacrifices to get educated or to educate our kids. We make certain sacrifices, sports people do that, musicians do it. They make sacrifices of discipline in order to advance their art. But I think Jesus is talking about a different kind of sacrifice. It's not sacrifice to get something back. It's not like, oh, if I make a few sacrifices here, actually everything's going to come good for me, and I'll win the day after all. This is letting go. This is saying, okay, I'm going to choose to embody the love of God by making a sacrifice where I lose something. I stand to risk losing something. But very often do lose something. I think what Jesus is saying is the mechanism or the means of divine action in the world is through unbelievably vulnerable love, which is embodied in sacrifice. Love always means sacrifice. To truly love is so risky, it means we're going to lose. We could lose all sorts of things. But ultimately, it produces fruit, it produces love, it produces healing, it produces reconciliation. It's ultimately fulfilling. It's ultimately the only way to really live. That's what Jesus, I think, is saying when he says, if you love your life, you lose it. But if you lose it, if you let it go, you'll have full life. It's all about embodying that love, embodying God's love through sacrifice. And we may not see the results of it. Like we may make sacrifices that actually seem in the short term to work against us. But over time, practicing this way, and we see this throughout history with the followers of Jesus. We see this in recent history through the civil rights movement. We see it, I think, in our own lives, times when we've made sacrifices that actually have been way more rewarding in the long run, because even though we've lost something, and we can't always see it, right? It can be really hard to see it, but it's worth it. And I think Jesus in this story is calling us not to give up hope. I often think about this with Jesus himself, making the ultimate sacrifice. Jesus gave his life for this messianic movement. And you think after 2,000 years, is Jesus thinking, yep, that was worth it? It's been little stop, start, it's not all been a great return on investment, put it like that, because that's not the point. Again, this is not the way of the world. We're talking about an upside down kingdom. So that's a sort of cosmic way of looking at it, but if we think about it in the same way on our own terms, never underestimate the power. We might not think our sacrifice, our choice to love in a situation where it feels so hard to love, we may not think it's necessarily produced anything. But never underestimate it. Let's cling to hope in all of those situations. Let's just take a moment to pray now, and we're going to just do a little exercise before we have communion together. And maybe we could just put the lights down slightly. I just want to encourage everybody to just relax. We're in this moment together. Same if you're on Zoom or in the room, we're all together. And I'd encourage you just to close your eyes and just center yourself in a way that feels appropriate for you. Very often it helps just to focus on our breathing. And we're just going to, for a few moments, allow ourselves to receive the belief of Jesus, the acceptance of Jesus. So let's just breathe that in. Just imagine that the ultimate reality, the reality that fills the air that surrounds us, the reality that is in every atom of this universe. That reality is love. So when we just switch everything else off, the background radiation of love can just penetrate our being. So let's just soak that up. Complete acceptance. God's complete love for us. Let's breathe it in. Soak it in. And you'll have thoughts. Your thoughts will stray to situations that worry us. Our thoughts will stray to examples of why we might not be loved, reasons we're unlovable. Just let those go. Let them go. Just choose to focus on breathing in God's love, letting God's love hold you and fill you. If any thought pops in your mind, return to your breathing and the true reality that you are loved. Now, as you breathe in that acceptance and that love, just imagining it filling you and making you secure and stable, empowered. Let it fill you with strength. Let it make you a rock. And let quiet confidence well up within you, because you are safe. You are secure in that love. Just let confidence well up. Confidence that you have all that you need in all the situations you find yourself in. Let go of fear. And let that belief take root. Let's just stay in a prayerful place. The band are going to come up now because we're going to take communion. And everybody's welcome to take communion. Just encourage you to stay in a very contemplative and reflective posture. You can come up to the front and serve one another or serve yourself if you feel more comfortable doing that, or in the middle here for the crackers and fruit juice. There's candles at the back where you can light to say a prayer. Personally, you can also light candles and pray for Ukraine in the back corner over there. Write out prayers at the side on a grow and journey. That might be just personal, very personal for you, or you might actually have a prayer request. You can write that down too. We're going to take communion, which is every week we celebrate communion to celebrate the sacrificial love of God embodied in Jesus. And when we take the bread and drink the wine, really what we're saying is, we want to participate in the messianic way of love, the messianic way of sacrificial love. So if we think about where we might be right now in that sense of God's belief in us, the confidence we can take from that, the acceptance we can take from that, let's, in our own time, say a yes back, that out of that acceptance, we want to extend that acceptance to others. We want to participate in every situation we're in the messianic way of love. We want to be a rock like that, a foundation that Christ's love can be built on, that can and flow through. So it's very much an affirmation when we come forward or go to the middle to take communion. So let's all do that prayerfully. I'm just going to pray, and then please come forward as you feel appropriate. Lord, we're grateful that there is another way. Sometimes we feel lost in the world. We feel lost in our own lives because it can feel that violence wins the day. Darkness prevails. Hate gets ahead of love. But thank you for inviting us into another way. Thank you that you've given us the keys to the kingdom. Thank you that we can loose things on earth that are loosed in heaven, and loose things in heaven that are loosed on earth. That your way is real and tangible and within our reach. So we want to respond to you now. In Jesus' name, amen.